My name is Leah Friedman, and I am the librarian for communication and education at the University of California, San Diego, in La Jolla, California. I would like to give a land acknowledgement for where my university sits. My university was built on the unceded territory of the Kumeyaay Nation. Reed will talk a bit more about why land acknowledgements are key in anti-racism work. In this presentation, you will hear each of us, Reed, Althea, Lindsay, and myself, introduce ourselves before our sections. Because this recording was made by each of us in different places, states, and times, this has been modified from the original workshop we were going to present at the in-person CLAPS 2020 conference. You will hear some overlapping themes throughout, important themes, such as the centering of white voices, vulnerability, and anti-racism. There was a zine that was made available when you signed up for this session, and that has references to our readings, so you won't need to take note of those while you listen.
Hi, my name is Lindsay Shively. I use she, her pronouns. I am a reference librarian at Diablo Valley College in Pleasant Hill, California, which was, is, and always will be Ohlone territory. So for this section, I'm going to offer a little bit of political framework about our work together, how we think about it, and hopefully ground the conversation that we hope to have with you all about anti-racism. So first of all, this workshop is for white people. Folks of color are, of course, welcome to participate, but we designed it by and for white library workers because as the folks who maintain and benefit from white supremacy, we believe that it is our moral responsibility to end it. We want to just acknowledge that folks come to anti-racism from all kinds of different places and histories. And so wherever you are in your journey towards unlearning white supremacy, we are glad that you're here and you're really welcome. So thank you for joining us. The main piece of framing that I wanted to offer is white supremacy is a structural force. What we mean by that is that it's not about individual actors, good and bad people, who's racist, who's not racist. Instead, it's helpful to think that we are all shaped by whiteness and that it would be impossible for anyone living in our culture to be beyond, outside, or somehow above racism. We are not going to be examining color blindness, diversity initiatives, or other kind of liberal responses to white supremacy. We're actually interested in dismantling it. And so we want to keep our focus on strategies and actions that seek to undermine and end white supremacy. That's the purpose of our work. So as part of that, it's been helpful for us to think about the ways that whiteness and white culture is embedded in our institutions and in ourselves. And this, of course, includes libraries. We work in institutions that have legacies of genocide, chattel slavery, colonization, segregation, and kind of all the horrors of our shared history. And our institutions are necessarily shaped by those forces, and it shows up in our institutional values and practices, in our collections, in our hiring, in really all elements of our work. And as we know, white folks make up a huge majority of our field. And as white people, we maintain and benefit from a culture that excludes and marginalizes library workers of color. So in our group, we take as a starting point that libraries and the white people within them are beneficiaries and perpetuators of a culture of white supremacy. And as such, we have the power to transform ourselves and transform our institutions. As you can probably tell, all of our thinking around this comes from left political and intellectual traditions. In particular, we are indebted to Black feminist thinking, which is really a guiding light in all of our work. The white anti-racist political tradition that we kind of position ourselves within is really really comes out of and is inspired by Black feminist thinking and organizing that's been going on for generations. We have bibliographies and resources in the zine that you can check out to get started on some of, if you're interested in some of the shaping pieces that we think about. I, in particular, really wanted to lift up the work that library workers of color have done to educate us all about the specific ways that white supremacy and racism show up in libraries, and to help us kind of unpack and understand that. We just have so much gratitude for that work, and also want to acknowledge all the shit that people face, that people of color face, in trying to dismantle white supremacy in our field. So we share a vision for a liberated anti-racist library praxis that supports and aligns with movements for transformative social change. We want libraries to become anti-racist institutions. Those are the libraries that we want to work at. That's the kind of library workers that we want to be. And so our community of practice is an effort to create a mechanism that we can use to take principled and effective action towards this vision. And our workshop today is an invitation for you to join us.
Hi, everybody. My name is Reed Garber Pearson. I use they, them pronouns. And I'm the Integrated Social Sciences and Online Learning Librarian at the University of Washington in Seattle. And my background shows somewhere in the Washington area from a hike. So I want to give a land acknowledgement for both myself and Althea, as we're both in the city of Seattle. And Seattle is on unceded Duwamish lands. And the Duwamish people have cared for and lived here long before the presence of white settlers. The Duwamish are still not federally recognized, even though they've been advocating for recognition by the US government for many years. They don't receive any of the minimal benefits of land rights or resources that recognition would entail. So in this land acknowledgement, I want to acknowledge the enormous amount of privilege I benefit from living in Seattle as a white settler. I pay rent to a white landlord and give utility money like gas and water to the city. A relationship which really, to me, doesn't have any reciprocity, doesn't have any dignity or any care to it. And in recognition of this, I pay monthly rent to the Duwamish people through Real Rent Duwamish, and this money goes directly towards tribal services. So this is still a relatively small act, I know, but it's one concrete way that I can acknowledge and pay material reparations for occupying stolen land and benefiting from this system that's built on indigenous erasure and a whole lot of land abuse. So we're giving land recognitions today because in our practices of anti-racism, we're working on acknowledging where our privileges arise and how we're benefiting from those. So I want to talk a little bit about the community of practice model that our group has used to form our anti-racist practice together. So communities of practice are groups of people who share a concern or a passion for something they do, and they learn how to do it better as they interact regularly. So it's really about relational learning. The community part is pretty important. A community of practice isn't merely a club of friends or a network of connections between people. It really has its identity defined by the shared domain of interest. In our case, it's anti-racist practice. And so we do this together and we learn together in this domain. So again, we're not merely a community of interested people in that domain, but the practice, the community of practice is defined by the act of practicing together in order to strengthen. So we chose this community of practice model as a way to share and learn and grow and support one another in this continual practice of anti-racism in our lives and in our work. I think the practice model and the community model really signifies that the work is never done, and that there's not really necessarily a goal, but it's the continuity and continual expansion of our practices and building and growth and depth of our practices together. So a lot of this has been to hold one another accountable in identifying issues and finding ways of practicing them differently together.
In this section, I'll outline how this group came to be, the sort of nuts and bolts of what we did. But very quickly, since the original CLAP session date in April of 2020, anti-racist action is becoming something that we are seeing represented in mainstream media a little bit more. Libraries or other institutions are holding book groups, hosting more workshops, making statements of commitment, or forming or strengthening EDI committees or other campus work groups. We are seeing many community groups being energized, protests are becoming longer, stronger, larger, phone calls are being made, and things like scrutinizing racist monuments and sports team mascots are becoming a little bit more common. So this is a start, this is happening in the world, but I want to focus on what we did so that you can see if it resonates for you in order for you to start your own community of practice or join a community of practice and have some tools and understand where we learned, where we made mistakes, and where we came back together. So we met at the 2019 CLAPS conference after a short presentation that I gave on whiteness in libraries. And we found that we wanted more of a conversation, a deeper connection, and accountability. A few folks came into the group, a few left, others were added, and we were the 4 that continued to show up. So how did we know that it was going to work? Well, we didn't. But we made commitments to one another, and accountability can be an incredibly strong influence. We wanted to believe that we can change our actions when we take responsibility for hard and often challenging work that we're privileged to be able to choose to do, because we know that BIPOC folks don't often have the choice to engage in or opt out of racism. So, our process. We started to meet via Zoom since we were geographically distant from one another, and originally used the Circle Way, a leader in every chair, the full citation is in the zine, for facilitation. We then pitched ideas regarding what we would read or work on, and these readings, videos, poems, ideas, many of them are included in the zine that is available to you digitally. We would then come back together monthly, occasionally weekly, to discuss. For example, when we did Layla Saad's workbook, Me and White Supremacy, which is a 28-day workbook with readings and assignments to be done daily, we met after doing sections of the book in order to not meet every day. But if you're in community with someone who is able to meet daily for a workbook like that one, by all means, I recommend that. That just wasn't feasible for us at the time. There were some breaks due to circumstances, and I can think of at least 2 occasions when members Zoomed in from other countries while out of the United States. So flexibility with accountability is a balancing act that your group will find for itself. Prior to this group, we all had commitments to anti-racism, but we were looking for ways to operationalize them. Some of us were doing this in an ad hoc manner. Some of us were doing this in our professional lives. Some of us were doing this as activists, and some of us were doing it in other ways. So this is another thing to consider, where different people are in this work, meaning that in a community of practice, understanding that some people have been reading, protesting, working within their system, working without their system, sending letters or emails. Some people have been doing that. Other people have been doing other work. And so there are different levels of knowledge and commitment and time. Another last thing that I want to point out that was important to us was the understanding that there was going to be a pretty high level of vulnerability that was important to us in order to do this kind of work. This can be challenging work, and we were open to being challenged by each other and being vulnerable to each other, to be called out by each other, to be informed by each other, and to be helped by one another. In doing so, we became very close. And I would not say that that's something that's definitely necessary for a group. In fact, as Reed will speak to, it's something that we tried to keep a little bit separate. So on occasion, we would have a meeting where we really were just processing things that we were working on outside of our community of practice. And then we would understand that that's what that time was for. And then we would have another meeting that would be just for the work that we were doing within our community of practice. So those are just a few of our nuts and bolts, the things that we did.
And now I want to take some time to anchor this presentation with some of the problems and challenges that we face together in this practice towards anti-racism. Up front is the centering of whiteness that happens as for white people in conversation and practice together. We have shit to work out, and this can really easily become a game of performance politics. We often talk about knowing how to say the quote unquote right thing, but perhaps the deeper inner connections may have not caught up yet. Robin DiAngelo talks in her book White Fragility about how white people are often very insulated from racial stress. We haven't really built resiliency around being challenged or facing that white people are inevitably and always racist and part of racism. And DiAngelo refers to this as racial stamina, becoming really highly fragile in conversations about race. So we took time with one another to acknowledge when we felt this happening and to be more honest with our thoughts in order to ignite deeper changes and practices together. It's like really an encouragement of one another to be brave and honest and resilient. Part of this is like recognition in this work. And this has been a real sticking point for us. Even doing this workshop, we're receiving professional recognition and a professional platform, which is essentially a recentering of our whiteness all over again. That we would be the ones to talk through anti-racist practice is completely necessary, but also highly problematic. I don't think we've come to any conclusions about how to do this with less harm, except to keep the leadership and work of folks of color as guiding in our own practices. But this is a part of our continual conversation, and I want to acknowledge that it's caused some of the deeper differences and difficulties between us in this community together. Another piece of centering whiteness is this idea of, and practice of trying to be a good white person. As we feel that we're becoming more enlightened around racial inequity, we may try and improve the work that we're doing and try and gain recognition for it, or altogether abandon other white folks that are on the path and trying to do this work as a way to signal or disalign ourselves from whiteness. This last piece I've found myself caught in many times, and this group has really helped me to return to white community, which is essentially the majority of my library community, and to really be in it. Ruby Sales has talked about how white people don't believe that other white people are redeemable, and that we don't want to work with other white people because it's not as sexy as working with people of color. I keep on regrounding myself in the importance of working with other white folks and believing that we can cause less harm together collectively. But I think the importance of that is, of course, centering the work and leadership of folks of color. Another challenge that we've really faced a lot is upholding commitments. We have been constantly faced with the tension of life happening, but also dedicating substantial energy to this work. For example, deaths and illness making it difficult to show up in our communities, feeling tired or entirely burnout, or our schedules getting full. And then the recognition that folks of color don't have the choice to engage in racism, and we do. It goes back to that piece of like racial stamina. So it's quite necessary work and also constant effort to return to this and to find the balance between caring for ourselves and also continually showing up even when it's not comfortable or easy. And then the last piece of challenge that I really want to talk about in getting into anti-racist community of practice with other white folks is this idea of holding back on making it a social group. So the four of us have become close friends, and we all kind of came together in the desire to do this work and be in community and get deeper with one another in anti-racist practice. But we also have other shared domains. We're all queer and we share this pleasure of being queer together. I think we genuinely enjoy the company of one another. And so we've really tried to separate this social time from the time we come together in this anti-racist community of practice. Those are separate beings to us, and we've really made a commitment to continually make those separate pieces. Part of this is that we've also learned to separate criticism in the space from the value that we have for one another as friends, and bring our friendship into challenging one another.
One of the primary outcomes of our work together has been the development of a small community that's built trust, vulnerability, and comfort and discomfort in service of the anti-racist work that we all do in our libraries and in our communities. Not all of us have access to radical colleagues in our workplaces, and we don't want to constantly tax the folks of color who are doing this work in our communities. Having each other has meant having folks to rely on for advice, feedback, accountability, analysis, and material support when our anti-racist work gets confusing or hard, or our feelings get hurt, or our energy flags. This has enabled us to work on a number of projects in a more radical, anti-racist, and resilient way. I'm going to talk about a couple of the projects that we've worked on with each other's support to illustrate what I mean. One of us discovered, upon starting a new job, that their college had Native artifacts and ancestral remains that had not been repatriated. They came to the group to process this, to strategize about what to do about it, and to check in as they were able to gain their college president's commitment to return those remains and those artifacts. Another one of us planned a regional conference on the subject of whiteness in academic libraries and needed space while doing that to discuss feedback and pushback that they'd gotten from other colleagues on the conference theme. They also got help with ways of framing the subject to push participants in the conference in really useful ways. And I'm happy to say that that conference had record attendance. Two members of the group have been working together to form local community resistance to white power groups that have been organizing in local libraries. We've spent time with this group getting analysis and feedback on those organizing efforts and on the educational materials that we've been developing. Together, we've worked on financial giving plans, collection development by writers of color, and the formation of a statewide ACRL racial justice task force. Because we've found this so useful to support our own racial justice work, our next steps are to help others form and sustain communities of practice to expand anti-racist capacity for all library workers. At the end of this workshop, we're going to invite you all to form your own communities of practice. And members of our group have committed to meeting with you as you all start your groups and gain momentum. But just to be clear, our ultimate next steps are to end white supremacy in libraries. That is our commitment, and that is our vision. We know that there are other folks in this room who share that commitment and that vision. We're here to support you and to learn from you. Anti-racist communities of practice are one step among many steps to reach this goal. But together with our comrades who are not in this room, we can build truly anti-racist libraries.
When we originally conceived of this workshop, one of our main goals was to foster relationship building among participants so that you can form your own anti-racist communities of practice. Obviously, that has shifted a little bit in this new format, but it's still something that we are really interested in trying to do. For us, this work isn't just an intellectual exercise, but is really an effort to live into our values. So part of that is about having a regular reflective practice that helps us move towards action. We have created a Google form that is an invitation for you to engage in your own reflective practice. There's questions there about your own visions for anti-racist library work, where you are in the process of taking action toward that vision, and what help you might need along the way. There's also an opportunity for you to sign up for a community of practice. If you do that, we will pair you with other folks. We have a proposed agenda for a first meeting, and if you want, someone from our group would be willing to join your new group in the beginning to get you all started. So as next steps, there is a live discussion and follow-up from this recording that we invite you to join us at for questions, discussion. We'll put people into groups if that makes sense, and we'd love to have you there. You can also use our hashtag about anti-racist work that you're doing in libraries or about communities of practice. It's WCOP in LIS, that's White Communities of Practice in Library and Information Science. You're also welcome to forward the Google form or this recording to other folks in the field that you think might be interested, or please get in touch with us. We found that having a white anti-racist community of practice has been just so helpful in accountability and engagement in our anti-racist work, and we hope it can be useful for you too.